NightMerica is an independently produced podcast. If you like what we are doing, please consider supporting patreon.com/Aaron Sagers. Welcome to NightMerica, a podcast that takes you on a tour of the abnormal, paranormal, weirdly true, and truly weird in every corner across this nation. Because whether it's ghosts, aliens, monsters, or monstrous humans, there's something strange in your neighborhood. Episode 44, The Living Doll of Key West, with author David L. Sloan. Ahoy, hoy, NightMericans! And welcome to another episode of NightMerica. I am your host, journalist, and paranormal explorer of the weird, Aaron Sagers, and you know all that because I say it every week. You guys should know that by now. But I'm super stoked for the story that we're going to tell today, and especially with the guest that's going to tell it. So this gentleman is a new friend, relatively speaking, just really met in October, but I was already familiar with his work. He is an author and a producer out of Key West, Florida, the author of 20 books, including The Ghosts of Key West, Haunted Key West, Quit Your Job and Move to Key West. You might be noticing a theme here. And the Florida Keys Bucket List. But he's also the author that is connected to Robert the Doll. He's the man that really brought this story to the masses through his book about Robert the Doll and also about today's topic, Count Carl Von Cosel. And David started one of the first ghost tours in Key West in 1996, and today he runs Sloan's Ghost Fort Adventures at Key West Fort East Martello. I have been there. It's a very cool location. We did a whole Robert the Doll Ouija board experiment there on Halloween night. An amazing night. Had a heck of a lot of fun there. And he's also conducted extensive research on various other topics, and he really just takes time unraveling the history behind these mysteries and legends in the Florida Keys. And is just a great guy and incredibly gracious, and was very welcoming when I went down to the Keys and spent like 6 weeks down there. So without further ado, let me bring my friend, author, producer, David L. Sloan into the podcast. Hey there, David.
Hey.
Thank you for joining today. So I'm in Florida as well right now, staying here right now, and I'm a little bit further north than you, and it's cold. So I'm guessing that means it's just another day in paradise in Key West.
No, it's cold here. It must be about 68 degrees.
Yeah.
We're freezing here.
I'm sure there's a lot of people that'll listen to this, and then, you've already started off on the wrong foot. They're going to start cursing you. David L. Sloan saying 68 degrees is cold, I guess, for Key West.
Yeah, for Key West, it's quite the chill.
Well, as I said in the bio, you've been doing this for a long time. I mean, it's like close to 30 years that you've been doing the ghost tours in Key West. Tell us a little bit just about how you began that journey in 1996, started one of the first ghost tours in the United States and in Key West. How did that begin?
Well, I've always been into ghosts ever since I was in kindergarten, and I had a kindergarten teacher who used to tell us about the Native American that was haunting her house. And he used to throw a cat down the stairs, knock around on the walls. And so as a kid, I was just so intrigued. And then my family had a haunted hotel right near Germantown, Pennsylvania. So I experienced ghosts when I was young. And then I was managing cruise ships. I hadn't pursued a paranormal career. And I took a trip to Scotland. And when I was walking around there, I saw a little chalkboard and it said ghost tour tonight. Mm-hmm. And I looked at them like, whoa, what's a ghost tour? Because they really didn't exist in the United States. There might have been a couple, but this is pre-internet, so nobody was talking about them. And I went on the tour. And that night, I think there were 20 people on the tour I went on. They were doing 3 other tours that night. There were 3 other tour groups. And I saw that there were all these people who wanted to hear the haunted history of that town. And I said, well, this is what I want to do. So I realized I could make a living doing that. So I quit my corporate job And I moved down to Key West because it's the second oldest city in Florida. And I slept on my friend's kitchen floor and started researching ghosts. And there was nothing. I mean, I went to the library, nothing. I walked around town. I got to the point where I went to the bars and I tipped really good. And I'd say, so I hear this place is haunted. And people were saying, not that I've heard of. So I was about to leave town and somebody appeared in my car and said, go back to the library. And I was lost and I was flustered. And I said, I don't know where the library is. And I looked up and there's a sign that says library parking only. So I pull over, I go into the library for the third or fourth time. And this time there was a gentleman back in the history section. And I asked him about a book on ghosts and he said, there are none. And I was about to leave and I said, no books or no ghosts. And he said, no books, hang on. And he goes into this walk-in vault and comes out with a file about 4 inches thick, full of newspaper clippings from the past 30, 40 years, all about the haunted history of Key West. And I mean, I really feel like something outside of me stepped in to make that happen. And it set me on this path.
And it is a town that, you know, people talk a lot about New Orleans or even Savannah, but Key West is a ghost HQ. It is a place where so many stories exist there. And, you know, we've talked a little bit about this, and I'm sure you've talked about this in other interviews, but why do you think that is? Why is Key West so notoriously haunted?
What I find is some of the best haunted cities in the United States are old port towns. So if you follow the Spanish trade routes, you know, you've got New Orleans, Key West, St. Augustine, Savannah, Charleston, and it continues and continues. So there's something about those towns. A lot of towns on the water. You're familiar with the different theories about how water can either trap spirits or enhance them. So there's something to that. And then I think there's something to be said about preserving the history of a place. The more historic buildings that remain, I think they make it more conducive for the spirits. And, you know, there's the theory about the Native Americans who were here, because Key West in Spanish was Cayo Hueso, which literally means island of bones. And that goes back to the Calusa bones that the Spaniards found. But another theory is that people just love it here so much that when they die, they don't want to leave. Yeah.
I mean, you know, you yourself, you wrote the book, Quit Your Day Job and Move to Key West. And that's what you did.
Yeah.
So
speak from experience.
And I mean, just in adding to the theories of the paranormal, yeah, water is always a big part of it, and certain mineral deposits that sort of retain that energy. But the Key West is an island. So this notion of if it's true that ghosts cannot cross over water, well, they would be stuck there. You know, they would be stuck on that little island.
Yeah.
So
the theories about the Coralline limestone being an anchor for spirits, and that they find a lot more. There's just a lot more activity.
Yeah. And talk a little bit about what you're doing now, because as I mentioned, you are the person that I think really popularized the Robert the Doll story. And I've talked about Robert the Doll on this podcast. And, you know, so you really brought this story to the masses, brought it to the forefront. But talk a little bit about what you're doing now over there at the Fort East Martello.
It's kind of my dream job. The Fort East Martello, it's an incredible fort. It was built back in 1862 during the Civil War, and Key West was under Union control. It became the home of Robert the Doll. And back in September, I was approached by the fort, and they said, hey, would you like to put together something up here? You know, to some type of a ghost tour. And I said, oh yeah, I would. And it was great because I've been researching Robert since 1996, before he was on display. That's been really one of my fascinations, something I've been dedicated to. But to get up there and to see the additional history of the fort, because it's not just Robert. And one of the first stories I heard when I came to Key West was from the county mayor. And she said, oh, when I was a kid, that was the place we used to go hunt for ghosts. So to actually get in there and take the notes I've taken through the years and get to spend every night in there leading these ghost tours, these ghost hunts, we're doing lockdowns and paranormal investigations. It's just mind blowing.
Well, and yes, so Robert the Doll at the Fort East Martello, the Robert the Doll is sort of the main attraction, and it's the last exhibit before you exit through the gift shop. But pretty much, but Robert is, as you said, only one part of the Fort East Martello. And when I was there with you, and we had our Robert the Doll Ouija board experience, Halloween night, full moon, Friday the 13th. It was all around. It was just a great, crazy paranormal night. But one of the things that I noticed is, as cool as Robert the Doll is, yeah, the whole museum is just crackling with potential energy and reports of hauntings there. Through your work with the Sloan's Ghost Fort Adventures, are you kind of bringing those other ghost stories to life? Are other people kind of cluing in on the other haunts that supposedly happen at the Fort East Martello?
Without doubt. And when I started, it was really the Robert the Doll experience. And we just made the transition into Sloan's Ghost Fort Adventures because there is so much activity. The Civil War soldiers, the engineers who built it, there were slaves who built it. There's just activity all around with them. We get different scents around the fort. Sometimes you're overcome by the smell of oranges. Sometimes you can smell the cattle that used to be there. And then there's a number of haunted artifacts. There's the raft that you're familiar with.
Yes.
The chug that was coming over from Cuba. And when they found it out in the Straits of Florida, there were 3 ID cards on board, but not a single soul. And when we used the spirit box there, you were there when the Spanish voices started coming through. And that's the only place in the fort where the Spanish comes through on the box. And there's the cigar rollers, the lady at the piano. I've documented 42 different spirits. And
I mean, I try not to tell people to believe or not believe. That's kind of their own choice. But I will say that raft in particular, walking by it and not knowing the history initially, when I was just walking by, going from point A to point B on some sort of errand, passing by it and picking up on a lot of just vibes off of that thing. It was very, very potent. Now, we're gonna, it's funny because we're talking a lot about Robert the Doll in the Fort East Martello Museum, but that's not even the story we're going to tell today. In fact, the story we're going to tell is perhaps one of the other, maybe without getting into it yet, would you say that this is Robert and the Count Carl Von Cosel story are neck and neck for the most famous tales out of Key West?
Without doubt. And the one with Carl Von Cosel, that's the one that put Key West on the map around the United States and around the world, where people said, whoa, there's some weird stuff going on in Key West.
All right. Well, before we get into it, we're going to play a little game. And I'm going to, it's literally a very short little game where I'm going to give you 2 headlines and you're going to pick which one you want to know more about. So it's not even a game, it's multiple choice, I guess. So the first headline that we have here comes to us from WLBT3 from Brandon, Mississippi. Family believes Christmas present unleashed paranormal activity into their Brandon home. That's the first one. And the other one comes to us from 4WWL, New Orleans. Zombie-like raccoons spotted in New Orleans City Park pose danger to pets. So out of those 2, which is the headline that you want to hear about?
Oh, I definitely want to hear about the Christmas gift.
Okay. Good choice, because out of the 2, I think this is the better one. But okay, I'm going to read directly from WLBT3 from Brandon, Mississippi, and this is published on January 25th, so only about a week and change ago. It sounded like someone was knocking on the walls. That's how Whitney Merritt describes the beginning of the nearly 3 weeks of alleged paranormal activity her family endured after receiving a Christmas present last month. The present was a vintage doll carriage. Her mother had gotten it from a friend of a friend and had gifted it to Whitney's daughter, where it sat by the Christmas tree for the first few days. The knocking, Whitney says, began at the beginning of the year. They would hear it on the walls of their home, which they have recently moved into. And the sounds grew so loud that on 2 occasions, Whitney walked to the front door thinking someone was outside. It was midnight, so she called her husband, who works night shifts. She said, quote, "I think someone's at the front door," she told him before turning on the porch light. When she opened it, no one was there. And then on the 3rd or 4th night, they started hearing a boom, boom, boom in the attic. She says that she's actually rubbing her chest, according to the reports, and it stressed her out so much that she was just physically anguished by this. The house was built in 1992. She thought, well, maybe it's just settling in, but she couldn't find any logical reasons. And then the sounds in their living room became so frequent they could no longer be ignored. So in the middle of the night, one night, Michael, her husband, went into the attic carrying a shotgun and a flashlight, expecting to find someone up there. It was so significant. They thought a human was up there. And instead, they did not find anyone. And then the banging continued, and it led to them being awoken from a deep sleep. And then one morning, they walk into a kitchen and they discover a bag on the ground that should not be there. And in the bag were coffee mugs that she had recently purchased from TJ Maxx. A plug for TJ Maxx there. And the bag was 3 or 4 feet away from the table where she had left it, and the mugs inside were broken. She says there's no way they could have fallen over. There's no way they could have rolled over. They're not going to break like that. 3:30 in the morning, another bang the next night, and another bag on the floor, another shattered mug. This, whatever this is causing a lot of damage. And then in this last week, in her children's room, the dream catcher and lamp in her daughter's room fell to the floor multiple times. And when they were investigating this, Whitney and Michael, the bedroom door slammed behind them as they were checking this out. So this is ongoing. This is an ongoing thing that's happening there in Brandon, Mississippi. Sounds like maybe that carriage needs to go.
Here, maybe they have the zombie raccoons living in their attic.
Yeah, that's also possible. Yeah. Either way, yeah, the zombie raccoons. It's like I don't want to encounter them either. Ghosts or zombie raccoons. I'll probably take ghosts in that case.
Yeah.
So all right, well, that's good. You made a good choice on that one. And before we get into your story, I want to hear from one of our sponsors. Support for NightMerica is brought to you by Manscaped, which is the best in men's below-the-waist grooming for more than 2 million men and counting. Now, Valentine's Day is upon us, NightMericans, and you want to make sure you're ready for wherever the night or even day might take you. And whether you're buying for yourself or you're getting a gift for that special someone, Manscaped has you covered. The best way to get started is with the Manscaped Perfect Package 3.0, and this is full of the best products to keep you looking, smelling, and feeling nice. The Perfect Package 3.0 is led by the revolutionary third-generation Lawnmower 3.0 trimmer that has advanced skin-safe technology and features a cutting-edge ceramic blade to reduce grooming accidents. And we talk about a lot of weird stuff on this show, but we do not support bloodletting. So avoid that altogether with the Manscaped Lawnmower 3.0. It's also waterproof, and that prevents a mess on the bathroom floor and in the sink. So let's be real. Unless you're a ghost, you are going to smell sometimes. I mean, demons, goblins, Sasquatch, and humans, they all stink. So do you, guys. But with the Crop Preserver and Crop Reviver ball deodorant and ball toner, you can smell good. And the manly scent is attractive. It's going to help set the mood. And I personally enjoy the new Refined Cologne. That's a signature scent by Manscaped, and it is a perfect complement to the entire collection. It completes your grooming game. The Perfect Package 3.0 also comes with a pair of Manscaped boxers. Toss those ratty, overused undies. Just get them out of there. And trade up with these high-performance, anti-chafing boxers. They are easily the comfiest boxers I have ever had. And if that is not enough for you, you should check out the Shears 2.0. Now, what are those? This is a luxury 4-piece nail kit that features tempered stainless steel tools within a compact case made of premium leather, and there's a magnetic closure. It's actually really nicely designed. You got these tweezers, these round point scissors, fingernail clippers, a nail file. It all comes together really nicely. I'm really digging it. Okay, so how do you get the perfect package and the shears? Well, you're going to head to manscaped.com and you are going to enter the code NightMerica20, and that gets you 20% off plus free shipping. Again, manscaped.com, enter the code NightMerica20 for 20% off plus free shipping. Manscaped, the right tools for the job. And we're back. David L. Sloan, this story, give us a time frame. When is this set?
This takes place mostly in the 1930s in Key West, Florida.
And I have to hold up, and I'll post this on the social media, The Lost Diary of Count Von Cosel. So this is the book that you published, and it's a true twisted tale of love after death. And instead of reading the whole book out loud, you're gonna give us the lowdown of this story. So here we go. Let's hear it. Let's hear about the Count.
Yeah. So the book, The Lost Diary of Count Von Cosel, it's a republishing of the diary that he wrote about the story, and it's a story that took the world by storm, with people equally divided over whether the Count who wrote this was a hopeless romantic or a very twisted, insane individual. And his story started in Germany. And he had visions early on. He had visions from these ancestors. And you never know what was the truth about him and what wasn't, because he had a great imagination and he made a lot of claims. But in his diary, he writes that he was visited by the Countess Anna, one of his ancestors. And she came to him in his castle. And she came to him and she said, "Carl, there's someone who you are destined to be with. You need to see her face." And she stepped closer and pulled back a veil. And there he saw the beautiful face of Elena Hoyos. But he didn't know her name. He just knew that he was meant to find her. And he set off on this search around the world, always looking for her. And he developed this obsession with finding this perfect girl, as the ghost of his ancestor had instructed. And from there, his journey took him a few different places. I mean, from an internment camp in Australia to Cuba. And in Cuba, he was walking through the cemetery in Havana, and he saw the spirit of Elena again. And she told him to hop this ferry, and he came to Key West. And he arrived in Key West, I think it was 1927. When he got here, he got a job at the Marine Hospital. We don't know if he had any medical training, but he told them he was an X-ray technician, and he was smart, knew lots of things. So he works at the Marine Hospital, and he was trusted as a doctor in town. And that's when Elena Hoyos came into the picture. Now, Elena Hoyos was a Cuban girl growing up here in Key West. She was young. And she was dying from tuberculosis. She had been married, but her husband left her after she had a miscarriage, and he moved up to Miami. Okay. And she was sick. I mean, it was bad. And when you had consumption or tuberculosis during this time, it was grim. Sometimes it was a death sentence.
The wasting disease. It took so many people out.
It did. And so she went to the Marine Hospital to see if there was any hope. And that's when the Count set eyes on her. And he said, "I can cure you." And you can imagine the hope that this gave her. They say that's the moment that he fell in love with her. Not so much when she walked in. He was struck by her when she walked in, but they say that he fell in love with her when he x-rayed her chest.
Okay.
So that can give you a little bit of the perspective on either way this story can go.
And he immediately recognized this woman as the woman from his visions, presented to him from the visions back in Germany.
Yeah.
And
it was the one that the Countess Anna had presented to him, and she had raised the veil, and this was her. And the way that the Count looked at it, he said, my destiny's finally happened. All my searches have paid off. Here she is. And he didn't think it was any coincidence. He knew that this was meant to be. And he believed that he could cure her. At least in his writings, that's what he says. And he started doing these different treatments, and he was doing a lot of x-rays, and he'd mix up different potions that he'd give her. He was a man of science. He knew some things, but most other doctors said, this is hopeless, and I don't know why he's doing that. And he offered treatment free of charge. And this was big for her family. Her family did not have a lot of money. The parents were a little skeptical at first, but he insisted on caring for her, and because the price was right, they went along with it.
Right.
And a lot of what we know is from his telling. He's the most complete documentation about this, and it's very one-sided, of course.
Yeah.
But he treated her, and he moved in with the family at one point, and he used to give her gifts, and he gave her an engagement ring. And some people, according to him, he says that, she's very shy about accepting these things and saying, you really shouldn't. Oh, that's not proper.
Well, yeah, I'm imagining the flip side of that was maybe more like, all right, a little bit creepy old guy, but you're also giving me free medical treatment and things are looking pretty grim. So there, Carl, not right now.
And I think you nailed it with that. And a lot of people overlook that detail. They just think there's this hopeless romance, but they fail to recognize that age difference. I think he was in his 60s, and she was, she was young. She was in her late teens. So the treatment goes on, and she continues to get sicker and sicker and sicker. And there's the back and forth with the family. And, they go from appreciating the help, and then they go to being disgusted by it, and they don't really know which way to go. And then he starts disciplining the family and saying, you can't be smoking around her, you can't have these parties around her, she needs this extra gentle care. And her father took her out to the Halloween Day parade, and the Count went through the roof. He said, what are you doing taking her out here? She can't handle this. And it ended up that Elena died, which was tragic. It was tragic for the town. It was tragic for everybody. And once again, Count Von Cosel stepped in. He said, don't you worry. I'm going to take care of the arrangements. I know you're short on money. I'm going to have her specially embalmed. I'm going to build a crypt for her.
Okay. Wait, let me ask, did he ever tell Elena or the family that she had come to him in visions, to your knowledge? Did he say that this was predestined and that they were meant to be together? And by the way, I had a vision when I was in Germany.
He did not keep it a secret that they were meant to be together. As far as how much detail he actually went into, that's up for speculation.
Maybe he had some filter.
It's really hard to tell with him. It's so hard to tell. But he wanted her. He was going to get her. And he took her body to the funeral home. The family's like, hey, she's dead. Sure, paying for things is fine. So he gave explicit instructions on embalming her. And these were really to make her last. And then he built a mausoleum for her in the cemetery. And it was a very elaborate mausoleum. It's larger than some of the studio apartments in Key West today.
Yeah.
And he had it specially built for her. And he had this casket with a couple of different linings. And several hundred screws in the top, and it was all enclosed in cement. With a little front door, he had a telephone installed so that he could communicate with her. And
okay, so when they were building this, and I think I've seen photos of the original mausoleum, and when they were building this, when they put a phone in, I don't think that was, especially in the 30s, maybe not a common, ever, not a common practice to have a phone built into your mausoleum. Did nobody at this point be like, okay, this is a little bit odd, But
Well,
we're just going to do it. He's paying for it.
he was very secretive. He did everything by himself. He was a craftsman, so he constructed the entire mausoleum himself. The telephone, I wonder if it was actually hooked up to anything. This was his way of communicating with her spirit anytime that he wanted. And I guess in his head, a telephone was an easier way to have her make the transition from being alive to being dead.
Okay.
Because he does mention a few times how he had to explain to her that she was dead and explain what was happening. So he took great care in that. But he did feel that her spirit was there with him from the moment that she died. It was his job now to reunite her spirit with her body. And he was building this wingless airplane. It was a huge plane. And he named it the Countess Elena. And he believed that one day the two of them were going to fly together into the heavens. And that's how their spirits and their bodies would be reunited. So he set to work. He had the casket in there. He visited her every day. He slept there a lot of nights too. And when it was raining, he'd just pick up the telephone and give her a ring. And he could hear her speaking from the casket. She'd sing to him. She sang the song La Boda de Negra, which is the Black Wedding. He took this to be a message that she didn't want to be locked in her casket, that she needed to be freed and she needed to be reunited with her body. So he came up with a plan. And one night he went in and he removed the inner casket and he removed her from her mausoleum. And he had taken great care to drape a blanket over one of the cemetery fences where neighbors would have been able to see. He had rented a house right along the cemetery where he could store the body temporarily. And he took the casket out and he had a little red wagon that he dragged it on across the Catholic cemetery and then over to the fence. And he went to lift her over the fence. And as he was trying to lift the heavy casket, it was very heavy for him because he was an older man. And he stumbled and he fell and the casket opened up a bit. And ooze came pouring out of it and covered Count Von Cosel. And he describes the stench in great detail.
How long was this again after she had died?
She had been dead for about 2 years.
2 years, okay. So it's still oozy, okay.
He believed she was being preserved in her casket because of his explicit embalming instructions. Mm-hmm. It was at this moment when the casket pinned him and started dripping ooze all over his face that he realized they had not followed his instructions and that her body was decaying. And this broke his heart, broke his spirit almost. He realized that her body was no longer intact. So he managed to unpin himself. He gets the casket up and over. He moves it into the house and he cleans her up as best he can. He's just devastated with the amount of decomposition that he sees. And then he takes a walk home along the beach, hoping that the breeze will get rid of the smell of death that he's covered with. And then he goes back. And one day when he thinks it's safe to do so, he moves her into his wingless airplane. And he takes her back behind the Marine Hospital where he sets about rebuilding Elena.
Yeah. So so the airplane is, he has parked this wingless airplane behind the hospital where he works.
Mm-hmm.
And I love this detail that nobody, out of all the quirkiness, that nobody was like, so you're just going to park your wingless airplane back there? Like, I don't know. Maybe it's New York. You can't park anything anywhere in New York without getting a ticket and people are going to notice, So I would just assume that a wingless airplane, someone would take note of it behind a hospital.
Yeah. And, Key West had more open space at the time. And he probably said, hey, it's a project I'm working on. I'm working on building the plane. And they probably said, yeah, okay, great, whatever. And he'd tow it around town. He had people help him tow it. In fact, on one of his moves, when he had to move it from the Marine Hospital, Elena's brother-in-law helped him tow it.
I mean,
having no idea that her body was inside.
And he was probably, looking at the pictures of him, he is definitely like an image of classic kind of little bit of mad scientist eccentric. So I'm sure, like, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm sure the people at the hospital or about town already thought of him as just another colorful character of Key West, quirky, but mostly harmless.
Yeah, I don't know that Key West had much of a quirky reputation at the time. There were a lot of people from all over the world who came through Key West because, I mean, it was still mainly a port town. We had the railroad, but it was still mainly a town that people sailed into. And you had a lot of people from Cuba coming over. You had a lot of people from the Bahamas. And I imagine what they thought they kept to themselves because he gave off the image of having money. He dressed in a tuxedo. He walked with a cane. He told stories about places of the world that most people had only heard of. And he seemed to be getting some type of a pension or payment. So he was taking money and going around and flashing money. And people in Key West wanted money. So I think people were willing to turn a blind eye to some things that might otherwise cause a red flag, because he had that money and the distinguished titles. A count. He's a count, for Christ's sakes. So being a count and a doctor and an engineer, and he was also a brilliant organist. He was building his own pipe organ. So he was a jack of all trades, or a Carl of all trades.
Well, and Carl, I mean, his name was not actually Count Von Cosel. That's not his real name, correct?
Yeah, and there's a number of different names. I think one of the earliest records showed him as George Carl Tanzler.
Tanzler, yeah.
Yeah, and he died at Tanzler, and at times he was Carl Tanzler von Cosel. So it seems like he was someone who was always searching for something else and always changing things.
But the title Count was pretty much self-applied, self-adopted.
Yeah, from what we can tell.
Okay, all right.
Just like doctor.
yeah, exactly. X-ray tech, doctor, count. Yeah,
okay. I'm not sure which one is worse.
All right, so he's got the body of Elena. He has taken her out of this mausoleum, which he built. He is now keeping her in the wingless airplane. And then what?
Well, the first thing he has to do is preserve what he can of her body and then rebuild her. So he removes whatever decaying flesh he needs to, and he wraps her in silk to create this outer layer of skin. He installs some glass eyeballs. He wires her bones together with piano wire. And then he helps sculpt her face with wax. And he builds this immersion tank that he fills with different antiseptics and different fluids. And he keeps submersing her in there. He had filled her lung cavities with rags to anything he could do to keep weight on her. And he'd weigh her every day. And he took great notes on how much weight she was gaining each day. And he talks about adding different antiseptics to keep away the different insects that were forming, and just how disgusted he was every time that different parts of her body started rotting. So it was this great labor of love rebuilding her. But he started getting to a point where things were going okay, to a point where he was happy. He ordered glass eyeballs months apart so nobody would suspect anything. When she was still alive, he had obtained some of her hair at that point. So with her hair that it was missing, he replaced it with her original hair.
But he gets to the point where he's feeling pretty good about his fixer-upper kind of project.
He was feeling good. And then he moved. And he ends up moving to an old slaughterhouse on the beach, a place where they used to slaughter cattle. It was this concrete building. And he moved in there very secretly. That's the trip that the brother helped move on. And that's where he spent a good amount of his time with Elena, romancing her. And he spent all his time with her. He played the organ for her. He bought her different outfits. He'd spend all of his time talking to her and, really teaching her things and talking about how they were going to fly away in that plane together. And they spent many, many years. And then I think it was the WPA that came in and started doing beach projects. And he didn't like people being around the house. So he moved even further away. He moved to the end of Flagler Avenue, which was the middle of nowhere at the time. And he rented a small house. He had a roommate, which I don't know how that actually worked out.
Really? I didn't know this detail.
Yeah, and some of the letters he talks about like the housemaid. And I guess they had separate parts of the house, or one had a cottage, but I can't imagine the other one was there without realizing what was going on. And there's tales of kids going by and peeking in the window and seeing the Count dancing with Elena. And word gets out. And people tell Elena's sister, Nana, that the Count has her body. And some people say she didn't believe it. But enough word went around that she decided to go check it out.
I mean, and he had been about town also purchasing women's clothing, and despite and people knew that this was a man that was not, to their knowledge, married, but he was purchasing clothing for a woman, right? Is that?
Yeah. And there's a theory which I tend to believe. A lot of people, you have to understand, when Nana finds out about what's going on, the story tells you that she goes over to the Count's place and looks through the window and sees her sister there in the bed and says, no, this can't be her. The Count's story says that he took Nana to his house and said, don't worry, she's fine. Because Nana started saying, oh, she's not in the crypt. People say she's not in the crypt. This can't be true. This can't be true. He says, no, she's fine. Let me show you. And he claims he wanted to show off the fine work he had done in rebuilding her, and showed her to her sister and said, look at the great job I've done.
Proud of what he had accomplished.
Oh, yeah. She was dressed in a wedding dress, sitting there on the bed, wedding band on her finger. But the theory that I believe is that he was paying Nana to keep quiet. Nana had known for some time what was going on, and she was blackmailing him. So he was giving her money. And then he got to the point where he said, I'm not paying you anymore. Whether it was because he wasn't able to or because he felt he shouldn't have to, I think that's when she went to the cops. I don't think there's any way in this town that this could have gone on for this long without people knowing.
And I don't think you've told me that theory before in the times we talked about it. Is that just because that theory is based simply because he could not have gotten away with this? Or, I mean, why do you think the sister was on the take?
Key West is such a small town. And I think if you've got a body in a house and you have a roommate, I think people have to know. The fact that the brother-in-law helped him tow the airplane to the new location too, seems to indicate to me that there must have been some type of financial incentive for doing that.
So you think people knew that there was something a little wacky going on, and either paid off or maybe turned a blind eye or whatever. Okay. Just not my problem. Yeah. He, as a housemate, he's paying his rent on time. He's not, look, they don't make a lot of noise.
Right.
So we're just gonna, whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. So, but it all came down, and the police were called in. The sheriff went out there, and the Count didn't understand what he had done wrong. And sure enough, Elena's in there, and she's in the bed, and she's wearing a wedding dress.
So he had married her.
He had married her. He believed they were together. And it's interesting because she was never divorced from her first husband. So I don't know what that makes things. But
I think it is just another, it's weird. And this is just another little element of the weirdness. I don't know if that counts as polygamy if you're dead and you can't give consent about being married, but okay.
Yeah. So they took the Count in and they gave him a psychiatric examination, and they said he was sane to stand trial, that there were no problems with this. Now, he had lived with the body for 7 years. So the statute of limitations on grave robbing had expired. So he was only brought up on charges of wanton and willful destruction of a grave. So
let me stop you there. So this is the only, and knowing this story, I can't get over the fact that there are photos of the psychiatric evaluation, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they walked away saying, yeah, do you know what they said? Okay. Did they say, well, this was obviously odd behavior, but he knew what he was doing? How did they come to the determination that he was sane despite all this?
And I've dug around for transcripts, and so many files have disappeared or just been destroyed. So I can't find transcripts. So it's only speculation. But I suspect that he insisted on a trial, and that they asked him a series of questions and that he responded as an intelligent human being, and that they didn't see someone who was delusional. They probably saw he was very charming from what many people say. So I think he probably charmed them. Then again, maybe he paid them off. Maybe he said, "Hey, no, I need this trial. I can stand trial. I'm fine." I think he probably argued for himself. Yeah, I can do it, because he believed in his innocence.
Right. And it's mind-blowing that enough time had passed that there's no real charge that's going to stick to him. Not desecration of a body, not grave robbing. Oh, it's too long has passed, so nothing's really going to stick to him. But yeah, there is that point that he thought what he was doing was fine, and I imagine that this was about to be quite the spectacle for Key West, and a trial would make it even more so.
Yeah, and as soon as the news broke, it traveled all around the world. I mean, there's newspaper headlines from all around the world, and it was just this bizarre fascination. It was like a Frankenstein type thing. And this is the first time that I'm aware of groupies coming to Key West. They came from all over Florida, even from out of state. These women thought it was such a beautiful story that they came down and they started gathering outside of his jail cell, just wanting to see the Count. They brought him flowers and they made food for him. And they thought, oh, he's such a romantic. Oh, such a romantic. And it divided the town to an extent where some of the people thought, this guy is an absolute sicko. And the rest of them thought, oh, so sweet. I wish somebody would take care of me like that after I was dead. But it was a trial, and it was a sensation, and it put Key West on the map. A lot of people hadn't heard of Key West before that. And ultimately, the Count was found not guilty. And he returned to his little house, and he started writing his memoirs. And he'll talk about people coming from all over the states to see him. He said he had visitors from every state, and they'd want a little piece of something that belonged to him. They'd take little souvenirs, and they'd ask for autographs. And I'm on the hunt for one of these autographs. I'm guessing nobody knew who they were and threw them away.
Yeah.
But he did that for a while, and then it was time for him to leave town. And I don't know if he was forced out of town. I'm guessing he wasn't welcome here anymore. People probably didn't like him profiting from the death of one of their girls, because Elena, this is a town that would have supported Elena. Okay.
Yeah.
The Cuban population of this town would have stuck with the person who was born and raised here. All right. And I think when he started writing about this and becoming a bit of a tourist attraction, they probably said, oh yeah, enough's enough. And I'm guessing he was asked to leave. Again, speculation, but the Count did leave, and he left in the middle of the night. And shortly after he left, Elena's mausoleum exploded.
Perfectly normal thing for a mausoleum to do, just explode in the middle of the night.
Yeah, and the more creative storytellers will say that this was Elena's ghost breaking free at last because the Count had left the island. More accurately, because Von Cosel was charged with wanton and willful destruction of a grave, I think he wanted to show them what wanton and willful destruction of a grave really was. And I think he probably set a little time bomb, a little charge to blow it up.
A final FU on his way out of town.
And the actual grave that exploded, the headstone, it's on display right next to Robert the Doll's room up at the Fort East Martello Museum. But the Count, he moved up to Zephyr Hills and in Florida. And it's interesting because he moved in very close to his ex-wife. He had been married before this. He had actually left his wife and children to pursue Elena.
Was he divorced? Had he gotten divorced, or were they still married?
Actually, don't quote me on that. My belief is that he had not been divorced.
Yeah, and that was the version that I've read, that during this whole time he was married. So Elena hadn't gotten a proper divorce before she sadly passed away. Right. And meanwhile, he's a bigamist with a corpse and a wife. And So just add that onto the pile of things for the Count.
Of usual things, yeah.
Yeah.
So he goes up to Zephyrhills, and he finished writing his memoirs. And some people say that his ex-wife or his wife supported him. They didn't live together. But then many years later, the Count himself was found dead.
NightMerica is brought to you by the Smell of Fear Candle Co. You know I'm a nerd. You know this. But what you may not know is that I also like candles, and a good smelling candle can bring a lot of character to the room. And Smell of Fear candles bring a lot of literary and film characters to a room. These scents are inspired by characters and settings from stories and history. For example, the Telltale Heart candle from the Essence of Poe collection smells like the infamous oak floorboards from that story, with just a hint of tobacco that I imagine that crazed narrator was frantically smoking. I also dig the Gonna Need a Bigger Boat candle from the Cinematic Scents collection. Jaws is one of my favorite movies, and this candle puts me right in the action. It smells like salty sea air with the wood of an old fishing boat and just a hint of whiskey that Quint was knocking back. There's also the Sasquatch candle from the Cryptid collection. No, it does not smell like the stinky beast that we all know and love, but instead it's inspired by the heavily forested areas in the Northwest that Bigfoot is said to roam, with hints of redwood, cedar, pine, and earth. Other collections include literary redolence, televised temptations, a whiff of King, think Stephen King, with more than 80 candles and counting. There are new candles being released monthly. Newer releases are Welcome to Fright Night, for real. And that smells like the fresh fruit that Jerry Dandridge was always munching on in the movie. Well, when not munching on humans. There's also I See Dead People, an icy blend of spearmint, eucalyptus, and mint. And January's releases are a Crucible-inspired creation and something from the Conjuring universe. These candles are a coconut soy blend with no paraffin, so they are eco-friendly, organic, renewable, sustainable, and have minimal environmental impact. They are also clean burning, with almost zero soot in comparison to other types of wax candles. They're also slow burning, with a fantastic scent throw and not made with nasty chemicals. The candles are available in several shapes and sizes, as well as in wax melts. They also do wholesale, custom, and a subscription box service that features each month's new releases. And the candles are sold on Etsy, as well as thesmelloffear.com. They also donate a portion of profits to various non-profit organizations monthly, and past donations have gone to COVID relief funds, pet rescue organizations, and crisis services. Isn't that just nice? That's really nice. I like that. Finally, with the code NightMerica, you can get 15% off your order at thesmelloffear.com. So check them out. Smell of Fear Candle Co. They make good sense.
When they found him, they said that he was holding a replica of Elena Hoyos. He had made a death mask of her. They said he had recreated her face, and he was clutching that. Other reports say he was on the floor by the organ. And one other theory even says that he had paid off the police chief and then he switched out Elena's body before that was hidden in a secret location and sent the actual body back to Von Cosel. And they say that he died with the real Elena Hoyos.
What do you think?
It's so hard to tell because money talks.
Yeah.
And, without being there at the time, it's really hard to know. The more I find out about some of the people who were involved at the time, the more I realize that anything is possible. And the stories in Key West, they took Elena Hoyos, they put her on display.
Yeah, I was gonna bring that up. So the body itself, they take it away from him.
Yeah, they took the body away from him, and they put her on display at the Lopez Funeral Home. And they let the kids out of school that day. 6,800 people came to see her. And there's this brilliant photo. You can dig around online for it. It's taken from inside the funeral home looking out. And you see hundreds of children just staring at Elena. And she's dressed in this silk kimono. And it's disturbing what she looks like. It's truly disturbing.
She does look like a doll, a human doll. And if you didn't know that she was truly a body, a corpse, you may not suspect that.
Yeah. And after they did the examination on her, they broke her body up into small pieces, and they put her in, I think it was like an 18-inch long box, maybe 32-inch box, but they put her in a very small box. And she was buried in secret. And she was buried by the undertaker and by the chief of police and by the cemetery sexton. Those were the only 3 people who knew the location of Elena's final burial. And all 3 of them are dead now. And you'll have people who claim that they know, but I don't think anybody can definitively say they know the location of her grave now. The best theory that I've heard is that she is buried in the cemetery close to the sexton's office, because that way there would be somebody to keep an eye on her in case the Count did come back to dig her up.
Which would have been something he would have done, because even while he was in prison or being held for a bit of time, or when he was released, did he not ask for the body back anyhow? Didn't he think, this was my wife and whatever, I'm not going to jail, I didn't do anything wrong, so I can get Elena back now, right?
Yep. Yeah, he asked for her back.
I've heard some theories, and I don't know how much of it is legend versus fact, that with the body that they actually split her body up into 3 different containers, and she's buried in multiple locations. Have you heard that variation?
No, and I don't think that's something they do. Okay. If you're looking to get rid of a body and you're just hiding it from one person, I don't think you give them 3 bodies to search for.
Just makes it more complicated.
Their odds. I think they would have been respectful. The Undertaker's involved, so I think he's going to do the most respectful thing. And I think the beliefs at the time dictated that somebody should be buried in the sacred ground of the cemetery. So I think there's a lot of credibility to that. Some people say she's buried under the oldest house. That's close to where the Undertaker lived. So I've been looking for a connection there. That's a possibility too. You really just don't know. But go ahead.
No, after you.
Oh, something really interesting. People love to label this as a love story. That's how the Count portrayed it. There's a great book out by Ben Harrison called Undying Love, which talks all about it. When I was digging around, I looked for everything I could get my hands on about a subject. And I came across an old pulp magazine. It's actually called Detective Cases. Yeah. And it has a story called Florida's Dr. Frankenstein and His Laboratory of Love. And I find different magazines that recount the story through time. And normally you don't get any new information. This one, though, had a story, and it talked about the 1980s when somebody was renovating a cottage. And when they tore down the wall, they found different bottles, strange labels on them, and a confession note. And they say that they looked at the note, they didn't know what it was, but it seemed to be someone admitting to killing someone. So they turned it over to the Key West police, and the Key West police discovered that it was Count Von Cosel, and he was admitting to have poisoned Elena Hoyos.
Wow.
So this is kind of earth-shattering, because the way the story's written, it's in a magazine where things could go either way. But the guy who wrote it, he's dead, so I can't talk to him. But all of his facts in the story line up with other things. He's not varying from things. He's not making stuff up. And he's got this one part. And I've been to the police. They don't have files from then anymore. None of those files are still around. There's limited storage space in Key West, and they keep things only as long as the government requires them to. And then they shred and they get rid of stuff and throw it away. So I can't find the police reports from this time. But this makes so much sense. The Count's in love. He's a much older man in love with a young girl. She wants nothing to do with him. She's not dying fast enough. He's got this plan to be with her after she's dead. So what does he do? He poisons her. He poisons her to kill her quicker so that he can have her as his own.
Wow. I did not know this part of it. And I mean, look, considering the other things he's willing to do, I would not put this past him.
Yeah.
This act. And plus, I mean, from his twisted mind, even when she was dead, he believed he was communicating with her. So there was not really a separation between life and death for him. So why not, make it happen a little bit faster and I'll still have her.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And it really changes the whole picture where it's like, wait a minute, this guy is not a hopeless romantic trying to save someone. It makes him a predator and a murderer and a necrophiliac who preyed on a young child in Key West.
Yeah, well, okay. I mean, but David, I think I was already in that camp of believing that. I don't know that I would really trust to be around anyone that takes the hopeless romantic stance as opposed to already someone that belongs in the true crime category, because really she had Elena, and we talk a lot about him, but Elena had no say over what happened to her body. And even though she has passed and depending on your belief, no longer attached to that, it's still her body. And did not give that kind of consent or what. If she had written him a note being like, look, if you can't cure me, whatever you do with my body, go for it. You've been a real good sport. So have the body. If she had left that behind, maybe, but she didn't. She had no say in this matter. So I don't think I'm going with a crime of passion here. And
Good answer.
So yeah, was that the test? That was a litmus test. I think I passed. But yeah, so it also kind of makes sense. So the book, your Lost Diary of Count Von Cosel, he did publish this. He published that in a pulp magazine, correct?
Yeah, it was Fantastic Adventures, 1947.
And so he's this is what makes it also so interesting and different than a lot of other stories out there, is that you have the guy that did it outwardly talking about it, believing himself to be some misunderstood romantic, except if he did poison her, leaving that part out of the story also kind of makes sense.
Yeah, he was trying to rewrite history in his favor.
Wow.
This was like the first, if I did it, here's how.
yeah, exactly. Is there any story about any documents about what happened to Elena's family after his arrest and then the years following in Key West, and anyone still out there that's even, I imagine there has to be people out there that still are related to.
Yeah. I mean, Key West is a very close town. So, someone's always a cousin or a niece or aunt or uncle. And, there's a lot of people who don't like the story being talked about, but it's history. And, Elena's sister, Nana, she died from tuberculosis as well. And I think it was her husband. He was electrocuted. He was doing some work, I think, on the base, and he tried to help someone and hit a wire with a pole and got electrocuted and died.
Wow.
So the immediate family died off. And, you're going back close to 100 years.
Yeah.
90 years now. So.
Well, however, you think about it as being a long time ago, but the thing I think about, just to put it into context, this crazy, crazy thing is taking place also during a time when Hemingway, and I think in 1931 was when Hemingway moved into the Key West house that he's famous for. So I could be getting my years off just slightly by one or two, but we're talking about this happening when these major literary figures are also moving about town and they're creating their own history, right?
As a matter of fact, I believe that Hemingway came up with the title of Farewell to Arms when they were breaking up her body. I don't know if it'd be better if that's a joke you keep in your back pocket or you just came up with it right now. I don't know. I just came up with it, but
I'll give you points for your quick wit and the darkest dad joke ever. Are there any? I mean, this is a true crime story with these paranormal elements where he believed he was talking to her ghost and things like that. Are there any lingering ghost lore that continues connected to this story? Do people say that they either see Elena or even Carl out and about?
Yeah, I have not heard much about Carl's ghost, but people talk about Elena's ghost quite a bit. And there's a few locations where people talk about her. And, you know, I believe when a story's told, I believe in the surrogate ghost, where other spirits might come in and pretend to be the one you're talking about. But where the old funeral home used to be, tours will stop out there. I stopped there on tours for years, and we'd tell different stories. And there's apparitions around there. Now, who knows who they are? I mean, is it Elena Hoyos? That's a funeral home where thousands and thousands and thousands of people have been prepared, had their bodies prepared for burial. But that's one spot where there's definite activity where her story is told. The other spot is at the oldest house. And the oldest house it's full of ghosts as well. It's an extremely haunted place. And in the back, tours will go around there, and they do see a Cuban woman, a young Cuban girl, and her spirit walks around the yard back there. Is that Elena? Well, we've had a lot of young Cuban girls, but when her story is told, people do see that. And it's not, you know, the Key West Ghost and Mysteries tour goes back there now, I believe. I had a tour that went there for a while. It's happening on different tours that there's activity when her story is told. So there's evidence for that. And then up at the museum. Now, I can't imagine why Elena would want to hang around her exploded tombstone. But when the trolleys used to go up to the fort, they would tell the story there, and there would be activity when they told her story. So, you know, is her ghost around? I'd like to think she's at rest.
Yeah.
I really hope that she moved on, because she went through so much in such a short time when she was alive, and her ending was terrible. And then for her body to have those 9 years before it was finally laid to rest, I really hope that her spirit is not anywhere, that she's moved on. I mean, hopefully she's been reincarnated as a cat or something, maybe a dog in a nice little house that gets fed steak.
Yeah. I mean, it seems like you would most certainly hope that after everything that happened, she would have some sort of rest. According to paranormal theory, it's so difficult because when you talk about a ghost or a lady in white, one of the popular ghost tropes, it's not like a ghost is wearing a sticker that says, "Hello, my name is Elena." So it's hard to determine who that person is in a lot of cases of these stories, of these reports. But considering what she went through after she died, even like the desecration, that would lead, it seems like, according to theory, a restless spirit, but especially if she was indeed poisoned. And quite honestly, just the fact that there's no real documentation, no real track record of the Count being a real doctor or having any real medical knowledge. He may have kind of known what he was doing as an X-ray tech, but he wasn't a doctor. So even the treatments that he was providing were probably some sort of quackery. So that in of itself must have, who knows if he just kind of even unintentionally pushed her along down this illness. Who knows? And
he may have been dosing her with such high amounts of radiation that could have killed her too.
Yeah, exactly. So, you know, all that connection. Yeah. Fuck you, Carl Tanzler. That's what I'm saying. Like, and I don't even swear a lot on this podcast, but it's such a quirky and weird story, and it's easy to get caught up in the quirkiness of it. But what a crazy old dirtbag lech, you know? And so, but a fascinating story that seems like, of course it's gonna be Florida, and then of course it's gonna be Key West.
And a journey into his mind is just, I mean, It's unbelievable. Seeing the way that he described it, it's just insane.
Yeah. The fact that he could write about it, thinking that, oh, of course I'm going to share my story. What? Of course I'm going to share. Well, no big deal.
Yeah. One of the few, his account was one of the few things that I've read that made me almost throw up while reading it.
Yeah. Well, so the book, The Lost Diary of Count Von Cosel, with your writing as well, your introduction, A True Twisted Tale of Love After Death, is literally what you could have gotten in that pulp magazine some 50, 60 years ago or whatever. So we have that, and that is available. And also, Ben Harrison wrote Undying Love, which kind of puts it into perspective as well. But in addition to that, before I let you go, what are some of the other books you want people to check out? How can people find you? And just kind of tell us a little bit more about the Ghost Fort adventures happening at Fort East Martello.
Yeah, well, if people are coming down to Key West, the two best-selling travel guides for Key West or for the Florida Keys are the Florida Keys bucket list and the new Key West bucket list. So if they want like 100 offbeat adventures, each book has 100 offbeat adventures in the Florida Keys. So check those out. That'll show you the perfect time in Key West. It'll let you pick and choose. It's a cool kind of travel guide, lots of local advice. So if they're coming down, check those out. If you want to come see me, I'd say go to ghostfort.com and book a ticket to come out on one of my tours or one of my lockdowns. I've done a lot of ghost hunting in and around Key West, and this fort has the most insane energy I've ever seen. It's an incredible Civil War fort. So come out with me, and I'll show you a good time. If you want to see me on social media, I'm the Key West Ghost Fort, or at the Key West Ghost Fort on Instagram, and I think a few other things, but I'm not there much. So,
and I will say that as far as the legends and the stories that David tells, they are incredible, but just as far as big personalities of Key West, if you go around anywhere in Key West and you mention David Sloan, people know who he is. And it's weird. Like, you yourself are now one of these characters, whether it's the vintage beer can collection or, wherever it is, people know you, and you have made your own mark, larger than life mark on Key West. So you're one of those icons of the Keys now.
Until they find the dead girl in my back room.
See, you don't want to end the podcast with that. That's the joke you make at the beginning, so by the end, everybody's forgotten about it. Now you're ending with it. That's the last bit. So he doesn't, just for anyone listening, David Sloan doesn't have a dead girl. Well, I mean, as far as I know, David Sloan doesn't have any dead people in his house or basement or anything. Oh, man. Yeah. David, thank you so much for joining. It's great to see you, my friend. Great to hear a story from you.
Thank you.
And we'll do this again, and I'll see you in person soon, I hope.
Great. I can't wait.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening. Please consider giving NightMerica a review on Apple Podcast. It really helps raise awareness and boost the show's rankings. Also, give me a follow on social media at NightMerica on Instagram and Facebook, and at Aaron Sagers on Instagram and Twitter. And share NightMerica with your friends. If you are able, I'd appreciate your support on patreon.com/Aaron Sagers, where I also create tiki recipes, hold live streams, and share exclusive content. Don't miss new episodes of Paranormal Caught on Camera on Travel Channel and Discovery Plus. If you'd like to share your own paranormal stories or get paranormal advice for entertainment purposes only, email nightmericashow@gmail.com.